evening, Central Texas. I hope you've been enjoying the warmer weather that finally returned over the weekend. Thanks for joining us tonight for Weather Extra meteorologist Jillian Grace. We have a lot of cold weather to recap for you tonight as a powerful storm system brought icy conditions across the region this past week. So we kick off Weather Extra tonight by taking a look back at the frigid conditions that we saw in Central Texas along with others across the region. Take a look. A powerful storm system swept across the central United States last week, bringing a bitter blast of cold Arctic air to 40 million people, which caused significant impacts across the entire region. Winter storm warnings and advisories were in place, along with some ice storm warnings for parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Driving was nearly impossible for millions of Americans starting last Monday and continued to be extremely dangerous into the second half of the work week. Rain fell through the warm air in the sky and landed onto freezing surfaces below, which then created a sheet of ice on roads from Texas all the way to Tennessee. Ice accumulation ranged from trace amounts to a half of an inch across Texas and the Mid-South, with some locations picking up even more than that. Treacherous travel led to deadly crashes across the region as well. Many interstates were shut down due to the dangerous road conditions. Numerous semi-trucks and cars were slipping and sliding across roads and highways, and some even crashing into one another. Even pedestrians were having a hard time getting around. Local first responders across the central U.S. responding to many calls regarding injuries due to falling on the ice. One Denton teenager decided to slide down on an icy road as it was way too slippery to walk on. Trees and power lines were coated with a thick layer of ice. Nearly 300,000 people were sent into the dark across the Lone Star State as power went out due to the weight of ice bringing down tree limbs which fell onto those power lines. And take a look at this. The weight of the ice brought down these tree limbs right into one Austin resident's home on Tuesday night. Schools all across the region were canceled, and many children were stuck inside as it was way too slippery to be outdoors. Thousands of flights in and out of the region were also impacted because of the ice storm, with the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport leading the pack with the most cancellations and delays. Planes were being de-iced, but the FAA ordered a ground stop at DFW on Tuesday because of the icy conditions. I'm sure you've heard our KWTX weather team talk a lot about freezing rain and sleet over this past week. We want to take a moment tonight to teach you a little bit more about each type of precipitation we see and, well, how exactly they form. So let's dive into it. A lot of times you hear just plain cold rain or liquid rain, and that happens when all the way from the sky down to the surface, temperatures are warmer than 32 degrees. Now, snow is the exact opposite. Temperatures from the surface all the way up to the clouds are less than 32 degrees. But where things get a little bit tricky is going to be sleet and freezing rain. Well, sleet happens when just a tiny column of air way high up in the sky, closer to the clouds, is actually warmer than 32 degrees. So initially it's going to be falling as just liquid rain, and then it runs into a column of air that is colder than 32 degrees, and that is why we see that then freeze. Well, freezing rain is also now the opposite of sleet. Now, freezing rain initially is just cold liquid rain that's falling out of the sky, but again, temperatures up in the sky are actually warmer than 32 degrees. But as that rain reaches down to the surface, that's when we start to see those temperatures either at 32 or colder, so the rain then initially freezes right on contact, making just a sheet of ice out of everything. So freezing rain is definitely what we saw in our area, and the main story throughout this winter storm was definitely those car accidents that we're seeing across our area and just the horrible road conditions that we saw. Now, roads were a mess in central Texas, but they also were across the entire region as those multiple waves of frozen precipitation moved through. Take a look at some of the crazy video captured as drivers hit the road in these dangerous conditions. Roads were a complete mess across the Lone Star State this past week. Many roadways became impassable, especially bridges and overpasses. Accident after accident occurring, leaving first responders across the state extremely busy. This is a look at drivetexas.org, a free and easy-to-use resource provided by TxDOT to keep you updated on current road conditions throughout severe weather events. Those white snowflakes you see on your screen right now represent icy conditions on Texas roads this past week. This is a screen screen grab from this past Wednesday when widespread treacherous driving conditions were found across a huge portion of the state. And here's more on what road conditions were like across central Texas. Slick, icy spots were found all over. Numerous car accidents were reported, from jackknife semi-trucks on I-35 to vehicles sliding off the road and ending up in guardrails and ditches. Many of the highly traveled roads managed to remain somewhat drivable throughout the winter storm. Roads that were less traveled on, and of course those bridges and overpasses, were the main problem areas. But as round after round of freezing precipitation fell, road conditions only worsened. Look at the view out in West Texas along Interstate 10. A multi-vehicle pileup was reported, causing the interstate to shut down for hours, backing up traffic for at least 10 miles. And outside of the Tyler area, an 18-wheeler slid off Interstate 20 and crashed into the median. Law enforcement said the semi-truck was driving too fast for current road conditions. Around the Austin area, roads were extremely slick as well, causing crash after crash. One person was dead after an accident involving 10 vehicles on Tuesday morning, and a Travis County Sheriff deputy responded to an incident involving 2 semi-trucks Tuesday. As a deputy went to help out one of the semi-truck drivers, another 18-wheeler started sliding on the icy roads, hitting and pinning the deputy beneath one of the tires. And across North Texas, road conditions may have been the worst across the state. Many travelers along Interstate 35 were stuck as sleet and freezing rain fell. Many roads stayed impassable as the work week began and remained that way for days. Countless accidents were reported across the Metroplex. Semi-truck after semi-truck getting stuck on roads, trying to make their way up small hills, but it was just too icy. Many vehicles rolling over and crashing into one another. And here's a feel-good story to warm us up a little bit. A group of Jeep owners banded together to help stranded motorists on Interstate 20 in Dallas last week, showing everyone what Texans do to help those in need. Sydney Piercing has the story.
Tuesday on I-20. Anyone with 2 eyes and on 4 wheels could see ice doing what ice does, and Texans doing what Texans do.
We are pulling semis.
Yep, watch this. A couple dozen off-roaders rode up to the interstate, and in their little Jeeps,
Toe straps, deer rings, shackles, you name it, we got everything.
Towed some seriously big semis stuck trying to get uphill.
I mean, why not, right?
There is no doubt the dozens of trapped truckers appreciated the lift.
Ready. Be safe, man.
Yes, appreciate you guys. Thank you.
It's sad to see them stuck, you know, like my dad's a trucker and I feel for them and I know I want to do everything I can to help them out. And I know the rest of the guys do too.
The reality is it's bad out here. We just want people to be safe.
Proof we can navigate some of the iciest interstates with just a few dozen warm-hearted helpers.
You would be amazed what we can do.
It's good to help them out a little bit where we can.
You often hear meteorologists talk about bridges and overpasses being the first places for water to freeze on, and tonight we're going to teach you a little more on exactly why that is. Well, most roads, they lose heat evenly because they have the ground to help insulate them, but bridges do not. They have this opening that allows the colder air to travel underneath it and also above it. So that allows the bridges and overpasses to allow the heat to actually be released quicker, which is why in result you actually have bridges dropping down to freezing temperatures before the actual roads do. So again, just to recap it for you, the ground actually helps insulate roads, but the bridges, all that cold air will be traveling underneath it. And that's exactly why we always see those icy spots on bridges and overpasses. And that was really what in our area we saw the worst of. Well, ever since 2021, Central Texas has been dealing with extreme cold snaps, as we've seen, especially when the month of February arrives. Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor joins us now to talk more about how our latest freeze compares to others since 2021. Brady.
Yeah, Jillian, this was a pretty significant cold snap for us. So let's take a look back and compare it to the last few significant sub-freezing streaks that we had. Back in February 2022, so last year, we went through a 33-hour streak of sub-freezing temperatures, brought us some ice as well. Last December, most recent one, we were at a 48-hour streak of sub-freezing temperatures. Now, this event beat both of those by a bunch. We were sub-freezing officially at the Waco Regional Airport for 84 hours. Now, how does that compare to 2021 February? Nowhere near. 205 hours. That's the longest streak of sub-freezing temperatures we've ever seen in Central Texas. And to kind of put it in perspective, how much more? We would have to have been sub-freezing 5 more days on top of that 84 streak to get to the 205 hours. So 84 hours was significant, really, when you add in the power issues we had with the downed trees. But fortunately, nowhere near as bad as the 205 hours on February back in 2021.
All right, thank you, Brady. But here's some even additional good news for you as we head into the new work week. A cold front will be bringing some showers and thunderstorms as we head into the new work week for Tuesday into Wednesday. I think the best news is that we are not expecting to see any freezing precipitation as our temperatures will be staying above freezing. So again, that is some great news there. Weather Extra will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Groundhog Day was this past Thursday and Punxsutawney Phil's predictions are in. Well, Phil saw his shadow Thursday morning and that means we have 6 more weeks of winter. According to the legend, Phil considers his shadow a sign of more bad weather to come. Now this woodchuck is no meteorologist, but it is a fun tradition that is said to date back to the 1800s. Phil also doesn't have the best track record. According to the National Centers for Environmental Information, his predictions have only been right about 40% of the time over the past decade. Of course, scientifically speaking, winter officially ends on March 20th. And on Mount Washington, New Hampshire, a reading of minus 108 degrees Fahrenheit was reported Friday night, which is likely a new national record for lowest wind chill ever recorded. At the time, the observatory was recording an actual temperature of 46 below zero, with winds gusting at 127 miles an hour. The National Weather Service doesn't track wind chill records as closely as temperatures. However, most meteorologists believe 105 below zero in Alaska previously stood as the lowest ever wind chill. And the U.S. saw over triple the average amount of tornadoes in the month of January. That's according to the Storm Prediction Center, which says it's received 168 preliminary reports of tornadoes throughout the month. The average number of twisters touching down the first month of the year usually sits around 50. Most of the storms actually struck across the south, with 16 states reportedly experiencing tornadoes. On January 12th alone, an outbreak across 7 states produced 70 tornado reports. All of the reports have not been surveyed yet, so experts say they may see a slightly lower number of confirmed tornadoes, but can still be considered more active than normal. New York City recorded its first measurable snow of the season this past Wednesday, putting an end to a record 328-day snowless streak dating back to March 10th of 2022. Until this winter, New York residents never had to wait this long for their first measurable snow of the season. The 50-year-old record was broken this past Wednesday, making February 1st the latest the Big Apple saw its first snowfall. January 2023 will go down as the warmest January in NYC, dating back to 1869 when records began. Every day in January featured above average temperatures. All right, everyone, it's almost time for this week's Degrees of Science with Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor. He spoke with Dr. Emily Becker, who is a climate expert. And coming up after the break, you'll learn more about the science behind El Nino and La Nina and how it impacts weather patterns across the globe. That interview is right after this quick break.
And welcome into this week's Degrees of Science. This week we're talking about El Nino and La Nina, something we talk about on TV but don't really get to dive deep into. And we got an expert on the subject with us today, Dr. Emily Becker, who is working for the University of Miami and also writes a blog for climate.gov. So Dr. Becker, thank you so much for joining us. Now, to get right to the point, again, something people have heard the term of, but they don't know a lot exactly what it is. What exactly is El Nino and La Nina?
Sure. Most people have heard of El Nino, maybe from Chris Farley's Saturday Night Live skit. It is not, in fact, a storm. It's a global weather pattern that is induced by changes in the temperature of the surface of the Pacific Ocean. So the central tropical Pacific Ocean gets a little warmer than normal, that's El Nino, a little cooler than normal, that's La Nina, and that has the power to change global weather patterns.
So when we're talking about waters near the equator off in the Pacific, how can warmer, colder waters in that part of the globe impact and influence the weather in other areas?
That's sort of crazy, isn't it? It's thousands of miles away, and yet it increases our predictability of our weather patterns here in the U.S. In fact, when you get that warmer, I'll start with El Nino, when you get that warmer than average water in the Pacific, you get a lot more storms forming in the middle of the Pacific than usual. And those storms actually have the power to send so much air and moisture up into the atmosphere that can travel around the world and change the location of the jet stream. And many of your listeners have probably heard of the jet stream. It's a river of air in the mid-latitudes that carries storms around the world. And so when you change the position of the jet stream, you change where the storms go and where the warmer and cooler temperatures go.
So we have El Nino with the warm water and La Nina with the cold water. So that oscillation, is there a pattern that it goes through when you are trying to forecast it?
Yes, it's the pattern itself is not very reliable. We say it recurs on a 2 to 7 year period. So approximately 2 to 7 years. So that's not very regular. And usually you'll get alternating El Nino and La Nina with potentially a neutral year, which is neither El Nino or La Nina in between. But sometimes, as we have currently, you'll have 3 years of La Nina in a row. So it's not, it's somewhat periodic, but not very reliably.
So we've been in a La Nina pattern here the last couple of winters. What's the latest forecast for La Nina for this winter and moving ahead?
Right. So our third La Nina winter in a row. We're right in the middle of it now. And the current forecast is for La Nina to dwindle and turn to neutral conditions by the spring of this year. And then looking out farther, we don't have a very strong forecast for next fall, but chances of El Nino or neutral are much stronger than chances for La Nina for next year. So it's very unlikely that we will have 4 La Ninas in a row, which would be a good change.
Yeah, so when we talk about the impacts that are felt, is this more where it affects the wintertime months or the changes in the summertime months of our weather?
Definitely changes the wintertime a lot more. The jet stream is more dominant in the winter hemisphere. So for us, that's December, January, February timeframe. So those direct impacts are felt in the winter. But if I can jump ahead a little bit, there are downstream impacts that, like if you reduce say La Nina leads to drier winters in Texas, which it does. A drier winter can actually result in a warmer summer. So you have these follow-on impacts that are, related to the direct ones, but come later in the year.
Well, to hear more on Brady and Dr. Becker's interview, scan the QR code on your screen right now to watch on YouTube or go to KWTX.com/degrees of science. Weather Extra is going to be right back with this week's Moment of Science, so make sure to stay tuned for that. We've been talking a lot about cold weather tonight, so let's switch gears and get a taste of island life. Dan Smith is exploring how those top vacation destinations formed.
It's said that no man is an island, even though plenty of islands like St. Thomas over here are named after people. This week, we're going from Canada right down here to the Caribbean to learn how islands are formed. There are 2 main types of islands, continental and oceanic. The continental ones often form through a previous land link to the main continent being eroded or washed away, whether by retreating glaciers or huge waves. Great Britain is a great example, sitting on Europe's continental shelf, but cut off from the mainland thanks to a massive tsunami over 60 feet tall some 8,000 years ago. Some people think of Australia as an island, but because it is a continent, it doesn't count. In that case, the honor of largest island in the world goes to Greenland. Over 800,000 square miles, more than double the size of New Guinea in the number 2 spot. Baffin Island in Canada looks way bigger on most maps, but that's the result of trying to make a sphere flat for mapping purposes, as northern areas will appear much larger. Northern Canada also has one of the weirder features, with an island in a lake, in an island, in a lake, on Victoria Island, the world's 8th largest. Oceanic islands are something we've explored before on this show. Earth's crust gets drawn under another piece, subducting and melting into the planet's magma. The resulting pressure release creates volcanoes, sometimes staying below the ocean surface, but oftentimes breaching the waters and layering lava over the years until it forms a new landmass. Hawaii is arguably the most popular such island chain, though Surtsey off the coast of Iceland is a newer example and has the distinction of being a UNESCO-protected site since its spectacular birth in the 1960s. Island residents can be as fascinating as the islands themselves. The Galapagos Islands are home to a wide variety of species, even though research shows they were never connected to the mainland, even in the Pangea days. That means everybody's an immigrant, from the California sea lion to Caribbean pink flamingo to South American giant tortoise. Meanwhile, 1 in every 6 humans in the world live the island life, with Java sporting just under 150 million people. That's nearly 2% of the global population. Well, talk about your scene change. The next time you're on vacation, maybe spare a thought for all the colossal forces that had to come together to create these magnificent islands, just so you could sit here sipping on banana daiquiris. For this week's Moment of Science, I'm Dan Smith.
That's all we have for you tonight on this episode of Weather Extra. We'll be right back here next Sunday with another half hour of weather and science. We'll see you then. But until then, have a great week and good night.